The Book of Enoch. This book is intense. It begins with a supernatural tale. A group of angels, called the Watchers, descend from heaven and fall in love with human women. They marry them and have children. But these children aren't ordinary. They become giants, the Nephilim, towering beings who ravage the earth, consuming everything in sight. Eventually even turning on each other. The Book of Enoch isn't a single scroll. It's a combination of 5 separate parts, with pieces possibly drawn from the now-lost Book of Noah. Scholars believe it was written by multiple authors over several centuries, likely from the 3rd century BCE to the 1st century CE, during what's called the Second Temple period in Jewish history. Although attributed to Enoch, the great-grandfather of Noah, Enoch didn't write it. The name was used to give the book ancient authority. This is what scholars mean by pseudepigrapha, texts that borrow famous names to boost credibility. The most well-known section is the Book of the Watchers, but the other parts are equally fascinating. The parables introduce a mysterious figure, the Son of Man, who will judge the wicked. The Book of Dream Visions and the Book of Heavenly Luminaries explore time, history, and the movement of the stars. And in the Epistle of Enoch, we get vivid apocalyptic warnings about divine justice. Though not included in the Bible, this book deeply influenced early Jewish and Christian thinkers, especially in the areas of apocalypse, divine punishment, and messianic hope. The Infancy Gospel of Thomas. In the Gospels, Jesus' early years are mostly skipped, except for a brief story in Luke where a 12-year-old Jesus teaches in the temple. But early Christians were curious. Who was Jesus as a child? What was it like to raise him? That's where the Infancy Gospel of Thomas comes in. This book is a collection of childhood stories about Jesus. Some are charming, some are disturbing. In one tale, Jesus strikes a boy dead for bumping into him. In another, he restores a broken jar of water by commanding the spilled contents back into the vessel. He heals, he curses, he creates birds from clay. And over time, he learns to be more gentle. Mary and Joseph, in this version, are overwhelmed. They try to parent this miraculous but unpredictable child, unsure of his power or how to guide him. Scholars believe the book was written in Greek, probably in the late 2nd or early 3rd century. It's not seen as historically reliable, but rather as a window into the imaginations of early Christians who wondered what it meant for God to grow up among humans. The Psalms of Solomon. Solomon had been dead for hundreds of years by the time these psalms appeared. So why the name? Probably to give them a royal and spiritual pedigree. Like Psalm 72 in the Bible, these 18 psalms reflect deep yearning for righteousness, for God's justice, and for the restoration of Israel. Written around 60 BCE, during the turmoil of the Roman conquest, these psalms reflect political disappointment and religious hope. They cry out against corruption, and they anticipate the coming of a righteous ruler, a son of David, a Messiah. In fact, this is the first known use of Son of David as a messianic title, one that would later be applied to Jesus. Though not included in Jewish or Protestant canons, the Psalms of Solomon likely functioned as hymns or devotional poetry for early Jewish worshippers, much like modern spiritual songs today. The Book of Adam and Eve. Also known as the conflict of Adam and Eve with Satan, this ancient story picks up where the Garden of Eden story leaves off. Written in Arabic, likely by an unknown Egyptian author, and later translated into Ethiopic, the book dates to a few centuries before the time of Christ. The narrative shows Adam and Eve's struggle to survive outside Eden. Satan becomes a persistent antagonist, constantly trying to deceive and tempt them. Unlike the brief biblical version, this story gives them real depth, portraying them as grieving, learning, and even repenting. And then there's a wild twist. The book says Cain and Abel each had a twin sister. Cain fell in love with his own twin, Loua, but their parents wanted him to marry Abel's twin instead. Cain refused. And that, according to this book, is why he murdered his brother. It's dramatic, poetic, and full of imaginative elements, like the earth rejecting Abel's body, or Adam and Eve preserving his corpse in a cave for 7 years. The story also contradicts some biblical details, like both Cain and Abel offering blood and grain sacrifices, instead of the well-known distinction between crops and livestock. The Testaments of the 12 Patriarchs. These are presented as the final words of Jacob's 12 sons, each one reflecting on his life, warning his descendants, and offering spiritual advice. Scholars agree these were written during the intertestamental period, a time between the Old and New Testaments, and later edited by Christians. Each patriarch's story is personal and moral. Reuben confesses to lust. Simeon repents for jealousy. Levi warns against pride. Judah, Dan, and Gad caution against anger, drunkenness, and hatred. Issachar and Zebulun promote simplicity and generosity. Joseph and Benjamin emphasize chastity and resisting temptation. They're not part of Scripture, but they offer a fascinating snapshot of Jewish ethics and moral thought during a time of political uncertainty and spiritual searching. The Odes of Solomon. Not written by Solomon, but inspired by his poetic legacy, these are early Christian hymns, written in the late 1st century AD. They speak of salvation, divine love, rebirth, and spiritual victory. What's especially interesting is how Trinitarian themes show up here: Father, Son, and Spirit, hinting at early Christian understanding of the divine nature before formal doctrine had developed. Though not canonized, these odes were likely used in worship, helping believers memorize deep theological truths through song and poetry. Their beauty and simplicity made them easy to remember, but their theology was profound. The Letter of Orestes. This isn't a book of prophecy or visions, it's a legendary origin story. It claims that King Ptolemy II of Egypt, who wanted to expand his great library in Alexandria, asked for a Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible. In response, 72 Jewish scholars, 6 from each tribe, were sent from Jerusalem. They worked for 72 days, producing a perfect Greek version, the Septuagint. Whether it happened exactly this way is up for debate. Most scholars see the letter as symbolic rather than historical, written to highlight harmony between Greek and Jewish culture. But the Septuagint was real, and it became the version of Scripture used by most early Christians, including the writers of the New Testament. The story of Ahikar. This ancient Near Eastern tale, dating to the 5th or 6th century BCE, tells of Ahikar, a wise royal counselor to the Assyrian kings. Though loyal, he's betrayed by his own nephew, Hadon, who falsely accuses him of treason. Ahikar is sentenced to die, but the executioner, a friend, secretly spares him. He hides until the truth comes out, and Nadin is punished. The story is woven with proverbs and life lessons about loyalty, humility, and the wisdom of patience. It wasn't part of the Bible, but it influenced Jewish and Christian literature, even being referenced in the Book of Tobit. Versions of it were later used in Islamic culture as well. 1 and 2 Esdras. Not found in most Bibles today, but still important in certain traditions like Greek Orthodox and some Anglican and Lutheran churches. 1 Esdras recounts events like King Josiah's reforms and the return from Babylonian exile. But it contains some historical inconsistencies. 2 Esdras, however, is more apocalyptic. It includes 7 visions seen by Ezra, reflecting on suffering, divine justice, and the end of days. Though considered non-canonical, these books give us deep insight into how Jews, and later Christians, grappled with hardship and longed for hope. The Books of Maccabees. These books chronicle a dramatic period of Jewish rebellion against foreign oppression. 1 Maccabees focuses on historical events: the desecration of the temple by Antiochus IV, the banning of Jewish worship, and the rise of the Maccabean revolt, led by Mattathias and his son Judas Maccabeus. 2 Maccabees goes deeper into theology, introducing ideas like resurrection, prayers for the dead, and the spiritual value of martyrdom. These books are accepted in Catholic and Orthodox Bibles, but not in Jewish or Protestant traditions. Still, they had a huge impact, especially as the foundation for the Jewish festival of Hanukkah. The Book of Jubilees. This is a retelling of Genesis and parts of Exodus, said to have been revealed by an angel to Moses. Written between 135 and 105 BCE, the book promotes a 364-day solar calendar and a very strict interpretation of religious law, especially the Sabbath and circumcision. It portrays biblical figures like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as perfect and sinless, quite different from the more realistic accounts in the Bible. Scholars believe it was likely written by a member of the Essene community, the same group behind the Dead Sea Scrolls. Its ideas were too radical for most Jews, and far too rigid for Christian inclusion. The Gospel of Mary. Discovered in 1896 and written in Greek and Coptic, this Gospel is shrouded in mystery. Though often linked to Mary Magdalene, the text never clearly says which Mary it means. It presents secret teachings Jesus gave privately to Mary, teachings that confused and even upset the male disciples. Only fragments of the book survive, and much of its message is lost. It reflects Gnostic thinking, emphasizing inner knowledge and spiritual enlightenment. Though rejected by the Church's heresy, it shows that early Christianity wasn't a monolith. There were many voices, many struggles, and many competing views on what it meant to follow Christ.